Hello, everybody. Uh, Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to be here talking about such a dear project and such a dear subject. Really, I will throw some ideas. In fact, I will start by throwing some ideas and some ideas around the heritage questions before getting into just telling my experience in the field of adaptive reuse mainly and rehabilitation of patrimonial or heritage buildings. So what I believe basically that there is a huge rupture in what I call the virtuous circle of cultural heritage transmitter. What's very important in cultural heritage is that it is transmitted in a way, and this is totally locked. There is no transmittal being done, and this transmittal and this rupture is really due to main two factors. The first factor, I think, is war and after war and all the huge events that took place really that created major ruptures. And the second aspect, I believe, is globalization, where we went into that kind of mondialization, that globalization, that where somehow we lost somehow the context in which we live, the cultural context in which we live, and the cultural context in which we build and work. So, and this created this major rupture. And I think there is something major to be done there in order to be able to talk about preserving heritage and really to be able to preserve heritage. And preserve heritage on all levels, not only, of course, it's the tangible and non-tangible heritage, but the other thing I believe the major approach would be in making that heritage something living, not just something, just dead and fixed on a shelf. I believe strongly in making it a useful heritage that can be really totally adapted to our actual context, to our actual way of life, to our actual needs, with a direct, strong connection to its cultural heritage and importance for that. So there is somehow a virtual circle that needs to be redone, to be adapted, and to be really engaged once more. And this works really. We had two examples of what happened lately with the revolution. Two major events happen. First one was the revolution that took place the 17th of October, and this really unlocked a lot of important buildings, the Egg and others, and unlocked majorly public spaces. And young people, young generation and people started knowing that this is a kind of public property. This is kind of really public belonging, and all this is their own property, and they have and they need to have access to it and really be active through it. And this is a major thing. And the second approach where things happen was the COVID confinement. And this was a kind of, the total opposite, where we went into a total cutoff, but at the same time, a kind of direct return to our direct home, to our close environment, to our direct context, I would say. And this is also a kind of direct link to our memorial process. I will just start sharing the. So here I will go through a different projects I worked on. The first one was the Teatro, the big Teatro in Beirut, where we did a very ephemeral, a very temporary project. It was called the Hommage au Grand Théâtre, where we opened it with artists, students, young. We had a direct access to that place, and we really did a huge event that took place for 5, 6, 7 days, where really we took hold of that space with students and with artists, and really transformed it into new use and opened it to the public. That was really a strong approach. All my presentation will look at context and the importance of context and the importance of layering of these contexts and the importance of really readapting the use of these spaces each time. This is an example of the Audi Foundation in Saida, where we worked on the full neighborhood in the whole quarter. We worked also on a foundation that used to be the family house originally, with the soap factory below it. and we did a major transformation into transforming that house into a foundation, cultural foundation dedicated to archaeology and dedicated to craftsmanship and dedicated to the old city of Saida, with a first transformation of the old soap factory into a soap museum, where here each time the most important approach for us is really to tell a story, and at the same time to open these public, to open these spaces, these heritage spaces, to the public, and make them really real tools and real communication tools and open tools to the public, where we can really transmit really what used to happen in these places and really know-how, knowledge about these. This is another approach, which is the Grand Omari Mosque, where here we're talking about rehabilitation and also extension for the existing one, where there is a full respect of all the historical layers. You know, systematically what's happening also, and what makes us lose this connection directly with our heritage, is this selective memory and this general amnesia that really took place in our country. Every community or every has a kind of selective memory, and goes through the memory just choosing what convinces her, what is considered for, as memory for her. Memory is something collective and should be open and really without any hidden agenda, and totally open to that. And in this project, we really respected all the layers, the multiple layers, and this is something we do in our project, really preserving all the layers and adding always a new one. This is another example of adaptive reuse of an old house. It used to be the house of Riyad Salah, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, who was, this is the house where he was born. And the idea was to transform also this house into a museum that would tell the story of the independence of Lebanon. Malheureusement, this building has been finished and ended and never opened to the public. Another example of presenting really heritage, this is a very specific approach where we're working on archaeological museum, where we create each time a narrative in a very particular building also, where there was a lot to be preserved and at the same time adapted to a new use and new development around it. We always add new layers with clear language. It's a must that each era has its own language and needs to add some plus to the previous one. I will go a bit deeper in the process of the making of Beit Beirut. You see, it always starts with the context, with historical material. We have a very strong and important raw material in the beginning, telling the story of an era, telling the story also of important architects, eminent architects, Youssef Haider and Fuad Qazah, who really worked on different eras and different approaches on the same building. Then we go really deeply in trying to collect as much as possible the maximum amount of details, of memories, of elements that constitutes the building, you know, and even all the traces, all these elements are really. The heritage is something very complex with these multiple layers and multiple stories. So we have to collect all that in order to have a clear understanding of the object we're talking about, and what is very important to be preserved and what is very important, what can be changed and what can be adapted to the new use. So we always start with this very meticulous detailing and scanning for all the elements of the building in a very strong way. And not only the architectural elements or details, but also we go through the process of what happened inside these walls, what stories has been told inside these walls, what happened here for all the traces left due to the war and due to the time also. And this very detailed work really brings us into each time telling a clear narrative and going to create a program. An adaptive reuse for these patrimonial building and heritage buildings cannot be done without having that strong base that story that is really within the layers of the building. And then by combining these two approaches, by combining the new use and the layers of memory, we can really project a new program, a new use for these buildings and give them a new life. In this case, the major issue was really to create a tool, a real tool to be able to work on a memorial duty. You know, in our country, we didn't have any memorial duty. We just went through wars with major ruptures, and we went through a process that's called the, you know, general amnesty that led to general amnesia all around the country. And this cuts off really total, creates real ruptures. So here the idea was really to consider this building as an open book, as a book really telling the story where all the elements has been totally preserved. Traces have been considered as major collection, and any addition to the building would act as a prosthetic element in order for two approaches, in order for the same time to reinforce the building, of course, and at the same time to mark an absence. It had a lot of meaning in such a building to really preserve an absence and really show how this building was really wounded, and how always I talk about this building like I talk about a real living human being with wounds, with traces of time. And the idea was not at all to do any lifting, but the idea was really to preserve all these layers and add a new and give him a new life, and add. So for instance, all this is collection, all the traces on the walls have been preserved and protected, but at the same time, the place has been totally equipped and adapted to the new use, where it became a cultural center dedicated to the memorial aspects, not only about the war aspect, but also about the city of Beirut and all the layers, architectural, historical, urban planning, etc. For the moment, this space has not been open, and this is another subject where we should really put the accent also. It is very important at the same time that we really take back possession of these elements, make them public, make them totally open to the public, and really make them live. And really, it's the young generation that can really tell their story in these spaces and can really take hold of these spaces and should take hold of these spaces in order to use them as they were designed in the beginning and as they should be real tools for real development around the heritage approaches and the memorial approaches. Here we always work also with the new addition. This is the addition that is a research center that hosts, for instance, 40 working stations for 40 researchers that should work on these memorial aspects, with a huge archive center that is already there. The building is totally equipped and ready to be used as a tool, but for the moment, it's really the victim of the power in place of this approach of selective memory and rupture, and really never been given to the public to be used by the public and by the young generations. Many exhibitions has been done inside the space, but they really didn't give the space up to new generation to be able to use it. And this is a major approach needed in really recreating what I call this virtuous circle, is really to be able to continue on the heritage and cultural transmittal, and to be able to preserve it. I don't believe in heritage that is really just, there is archaeology for that, but really I believe more in cultural heritage that is a real living tool and useful and totally adapted to our actual situation, actual needs.